And as we move into the final section on this week's show, our two final items are the next chapter of our audiobook, Chapter 2 of Propaganda, read by Alan Taylor Shearer, and to leave you with a smile on your face, we conclude with a Batsby. But now, Chapter 2, Propaganda.
Propaganda by Edward Bernays, written in 1928. Chapter 2, The New Propaganda. In the days when kings were kings, Louis XIV made his modest remark, "L'Etat, c'est moi." He was nearly right, but times have changed. The steam engine, the multiple press and the public school, that trio of the Industrial Revolution, have taken the power away from kings and given it to the people. The people actually gained power when the king lost, for economic power tends to draw after it political power. And the history of the Industrial Revolution shows how that power passed from king and the aristocracy to the bourgeoisie. Universal suffrage and universal schooling reinforce this tendency, and at last even the bourgeoisie stood in fear of the common people, for the masses promised to become king. Today, however, a reaction has set in. The minority has discovered a powerful help in influencing majorities. It's been found possible so to mould the mind of the masses that they will throw their newly gained strength in the desired direction. In the present structure of society, this practice is inevitable. Whatever of social importance is done today, whether in politics, finance, manufacture, agriculture, charity, education, or other fields, must be done with the help of propaganda. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Universal literacy was supposed to educate the common man to control his environment. Once he could read and write, he would have a mind fit to rule. So ran the democratic doctrine. But instead of a mind, universal literacy has given him rubber stamps. Rubber stamps inked with advertising slogans, with editorials, with published scientific data, with the trivialities of the tabloids and the platitudes of history, but quite innocent of original thought. Each man's rubber stamps are the duplicates of millions of others, so that when those millions are exposed to the same stimuli, all receive identical imprints. It may seem an exaggeration to say that the American public gets most of its ideas in this wholesale fashion. The mechanism by which ideas are disseminated on a large scale is propaganda, in the broad sense of the organised effort to spread a particular belief or doctrine. I am aware that the word propaganda carries to many minds an unpleasant connotation, yet whether in an instance propaganda is good or bad depends upon the merit of the cause urged and the correctness of the information published. In itself, the word propaganda has certain technical meanings which, like most things in this world, are neither good nor bad, but custom makes them so. I find the word defined in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary in 4 ways. 1. A society of cardinals, the overseers of foreign missions, also the College of the Propaganda at Rome, founded by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 for the education of missionary priests, Sacred College de Propaganda Fide. 2. Hence, any institution or scheme for propagating a doctrine or system. 3. Effort directed systematically toward the gaining of public support for an opinion or a course of action. 4. The principles advanced by a propaganda. The Scientific American, in a recent issue, pleads for the restoration of respectable usage of that fine old word, propaganda. There is no word in the English language, it says, whose meaning has been so sadly distorted as the word propaganda. The change took place mainly during the late war, when the term took on a decidedly sinister complexion. If you turn to the Standard Dictionary, you'll find that the word was applied to a congregation or society of cardinals for the care and oversight of foreign missions, which was instituted at Rome in the year 1627. It was applied also to the College of the Propaganda at Rome that was founded by Pope Urban VIII for the education of the missionary priests. Hence, in later years, the word came to be applied to any institution or scheme for propagating a doctrine or system. Judged by this definition, we can see that in its true sense, propaganda is a perfectly legitimate form of human activity. Any society, whether it be social, religious, or political, which is possessed of certain beliefs and sets out to make them known, either by the spoken or written words, is practicing propaganda. Truth is mighty and must prevail, and if any body of men believe that they have discovered a valuable truth, it is not merely their privilege, but their duty to disseminate that truth. If they realize that they quickly must, then this spreading of the truth can be done upon a large scale and effectively only by organized effort. They will make use of the press and the platform as the best means to give it wide circulation. Propaganda becomes vicious and reprehensive only when its authors consciously and deliberately disseminate what they know to be lies, or when they aim at efforts which they know to be prejudicial to the common good. Propaganda, in its proper meaning, is a perfectly wholesome word of honest parentage and with an honourable history. The fact that it should today be carrying a sinister meaning merely shows how much of the citizen remains in the average adult. A group of citizens writes and talks in favour of a certain course of action in some debatable question, believing that it is promoting the best interests of the community. Propaganda? Not a bit of it, just a plain forceful statement of truth. But let another group of citizens express opposing views, and they are promptly labelled with the sinister name of propaganda. What is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, says a wise old proverb. Let us make haste to put this fine old word back where it belongs and restore its dignified significance for the use of our children and our children's children. The extent to which propaganda shapes the progress of affairs about us may surprise even well-informed persons. Nevertheless, it is only necessary to look under the surface of the newspaper for a hint as to propaganda's authority over public opinion. Page 1 of the New York Times on the day these paragraphs are written contains 8 important news stories. 4 of them, or one half, are propaganda. The casual reader accepts them as accounts of spontaneous happenings. But are they? Here are the headlines which announce them. 12 nations warn China real reform must come before they will get relief. Pritchett reports Zionism will fail. Reality men demand a transit inquiry. And our living standard highest in history, says Hoover report. Take them in order. The article on China explains the joint report of the Commission on Extraterritoriality in China, presenting an exposition of the powers and their stand in the Chinese muddle. What it says is less important than what it is. It was made public by the State Department today with the purpose of presenting to the American public a picture of the State Department's position. Its source gives it authority, and the American public tends to accept and support the State Department view. The report of Dr. Pritchett, a trustee of the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, is an attempt to find the facts about this Jewish colony in the midst of a restless Arab world. When Dr. Pritchett's survey convinced him that in the long run Zionism would bring more bitterness and more unhappiness both for the Jew and for the Arab, this point of view was broadcast with all the authority of the Carnegie Foundation, so that the public would hear and believe. The statement by the President of the Real Estate Board of New York and Secretary Hoover's report are similar attempts to influence the public toward an opinion. These examples are not given to create the impression that there is anything sinister about propaganda. They're set down rather to illustrate how conscious direction is given to events and how the men behind these events influence public opinion. As such, they're examples of modern propaganda. At this point, we may attempt to define propaganda. Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. This practice of creating circumstances and of creating pictures in the minds of millions of persons is very common. Virtually no important undertaking is now carried on without it, whether that enterprise be building a cathedral, endowing a university, marketing a moving picture, floating a large bond issue, or electing a president. Sometimes the effect on the public is created by a professional propagandist, sometimes by an amateur deputy for the job. The important thing is that it is universal and continuous, and in its sum total it is regimenting the public mind, every bit as much as an army regiments the bodies of its soldiers. So vast are the numbers of minds which can be regimented, and so tenacious are they when regimented, that a group at times offers an irresistible pressure before which legislators, editors, and teachers are helpless. The group will cling to its stereotype, as Walter Lippmann calls it, making of those supposedly powerful beings, the leaders of public opinion, mere bits of driftwood in the surf. When an imperial wizard, sensing what is perhaps hunger for an ideal, offers a picture of a nation all Nordic and nationalistic, the common man of the older American stock, feeling himself elbowed out of his rightful position and prosperity by the newer immigrant stocks, grasps the picture which fits in so neatly with his prejudices and makes it his own. He buys the sheet and pillowcase costume and bands with his fellows by the thousand into a huge group powerful enough to swing state elections and to throw a ponderous monkey wrench into a national convention. In our present social organisation, approval of the public is essential to any large undertaking. Hence, a laudable movement may be lost unless it impresses itself on the public mind. Charity, as well as business and politics and literature for that matter, have had to adopt propaganda, for the public must be regimented into giving money just as it must be regimented into tuberculosis prophylaxis. The Near East Relief, the Association for the Improvement of the Condition of the Poor of New York, and all the rest have to work on public opinion just as though they had tubes of toothpaste to sell. We are proud of our diminishing infant death rate, and that too is the work of propaganda. Propaganda does exist on all sides of us, and it does change our mental pictures of the world, even if this be unduly pessimistic, and that remains to be proved. The opinion reflects a tendency that is undoubtedly real. In fact, its use is growing as its efficiency in gaining public support is recognized. This, then, evidently indicates the fact that anyone with sufficient influence can lead sections of the public at least for a time and for a given purpose. Formerly, the rulers were the leaders. They laid out the course of history by the simple process of doing what they wanted. And if nowadays the successors of the rulers, those whose position or ability gives them power, can no longer do what they want without the approval of the masses, they find in propaganda a tool which is increasingly powerful in gaining that approval. Therefore, propaganda is here to stay. It was, of course, the astounding success of propaganda during the war that opened the eyes of the intelligent few in all departments of life to the possibilities of regimenting the public mind. The American government, and numerous patriotic agencies developed a technique which, to most persons accustomed to bidding for public acceptance, was new. They not only appealed to the individual by means of every approach, visual, graphic and auditory, to support the national endeavour, but they also secured the cooperation of the key men in every group, persons whose mere word carried authority to hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. They thus automatically gained the support of fraternal, religious, commercial, patriotic, social and local groups whose members took their opinions from their accustomed leaders and spokesmen, or from the periodical publications which they were accustomed to read and believe. At the same time, the manipulators of patriotic opinion made use of the mental clichés and emotional habits of the public to produce mass reactions against the alleged atrocities and terror of the tyranny of the enemy. It was only natural, after the war ended, that intelligent persons should ask themselves whether it was not possible to apply a similar technique to the problems of peace. As a matter of fact, the practice of propaganda since the war has assumed very different forms from those prevalent 20 years ago. This new technique may fairly be called the new propaganda. It takes account not merely of the individual, nor even of the mass mind alone, but also and especially of the anatomy of society, with its interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organised into the social unit. Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism. Business offers graphic examples of the effects that may be produced upon the public by interested groups, such as textile manufacturers losing their markets. This problem arose not long ago when the velvet manufacturers were facing ruin because their product had long been out of fashion. Analysis showed that it was impossible to revive a velvet fashion within America. Anatomical hunt for the vital spot, Paris, obviously, but yes and no. Paris is the home of fashion, Lyon the home of silk. The attack had to be made at the source. It was determined to substitute purpose for chance and to utilize the regular source for fashion distribution and to influence the public from these sources. A velvet fashion service, openly supported by the manufacturers, was organized. Its first function was to establish contact with the Lyon manufacturers and the Paris couturiers to discover what they were doing, to encourage them to act on behalf of velvet, and to help in the proper exploitation of their wares. An intelligent Parisian was enlisted for the work. He visited Lanvin and Worth, Agnes and Couture, and others, and induced them to use velvet in their gowns and hats. It was he who arranged for the distinguished Countess this or Duchess that to wear the hat or the gown. And as for the presentation of the idea to the public, the American buyer, or the American women of fashion, was simply shown the velvet creations in the atelier of the dressmaker or the milliner. She bought the velvet because she liked it, and because it was in fashion. The editors of the American magazines and fashion reporters of the American newspapers, likewise, subjected to the actual, although created, circumstance, reflected it in their news, which in turn subjected the buyer and the consumer here to the same influences. The result was that what was at first a trickle of velvet became a flood. A demand was slowly but deliberately created in Paris and America. A big department store, aiming to be a style leader, advertised velvet gowns and hats on the authority of the French couturiers, and quoted original cables received from them. The echo of the new style note was heard from hundreds of department stores throughout the country, which wanted to be style leaders too. Bulletins followed dispatches, the mail followed the cables, and the American woman traveller appeared before the ship news photographers in velvet gown and hat. The created circumstances had their effect. Fickle fashion has veered to velvet, was one newspaper comment, and the industry in the United States again kept thousands busy. The new propaganda, having regard to the constitution of society as a whole, not infrequently serves to focus and realise the desires of the masses. A desire for a specific reform, however widespread, cannot be translated into action until it is made articulate, and until it has exerted sufficient pressure upon the proper law-making bodies. Millions of housewives may feel that manufactured foods, deleterious to health, should be prohibited, but there is little chance that their individual desires will be translated into effective legal form unless their half-expressed demand can be organised, made vocal, and concentrated upon the state legislature or upon the federal Congress in some mode which will produce the results they desire. Whether they realise it or not, they call upon propaganda to organise and effectuate their demand. But clearly it is the intelligent minorities which need to make use of propaganda continuously and systematically. In the active proselytization, minorities of whom selfish interests and public interest coincide, lie the progress and development of America. Only through the active energy of the intelligent few can the public at large become aware of and act upon new ideas. Small groups of persons can and do make the rest of us think what they please about a given subject, but there are usually proponents and opponents of every propaganda, both of whom are equally eager to convince the majority. End of chapter 2.